What's up, my wizards? It's Dale from SBMTG down there on the YouTube.com. We like magic, and today, as usual, got a deck tag for you. Let's talk about green-black artifacts, aka Tireless Trafficker. That's a great name for a deck. This is a cool deck. It plays off of the synergy between Tireless Tracker and Syndicate Trafficker, and it's got an Aristocrats sub-theme, at least the way I've built it, because I love Aristocrats. Newer players, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Aristocrats is a deck type that usually gets some sort of value out of sacrificing permanents, usually creatures. And in this format, we got a lot of stuff that can help us drain the opponent out when things go to the graveyard. So let's put it all together and see what we come up with here. This is a really fun deck that I've enjoyed playing a lot. I'll go ahead and let you know that we are going all the way here and playing a full play set of Marionette Master, which sounds crazy, but I'll get back to that in a second. We're also going to play a playset of Zulaport Cutthroat and a playset of Underhanded Designs. But back to Marionette Master, that deserves the most explanation because I've played all four, where you'd normally play 2 or 3 here, I think. I just wanted to see this card way more often than I was when I was just playing 3. And yeah, I'd see it, once a game, something like that, but I wanted multiple copies because it's so good into multiples. Now, even if you only have one on the battlefield and it's a 4-power Marionette Master, let's say you have one on the battlefield and you have a Syndicate Trafficker and a Tireless Tracker. Well, when you sacrifice clues to the Syndicate Trafficker, you're dealing 4 a pop to the opponent. That can close a game out very quickly, and when you draw a second one, you now have the choice of either getting more sacrifice fodder onto the battlefield in the form of 3 servo tokens, or you can put another huge one out and just close the game out by only sacrificing like 2 artifacts. So Marionette Master is incredibly flexible, and I do want to play 4. I want to see it all day, especially considering, just to ease the tension here, we are playing some ramp in the deck to help us get to this a little quicker. There are very fast decks in the format right now, so we can't afford to dilly-dally and mess around and want to get to a card that costs 6 mana, because it's not going to happen every game. So not only do we have a bunch of small creatures to help us block aggro and get into the mid-game, but we also have some ramp to help us get to this a little bit faster, so keep that in mind. But moving on, we're playing 4 copies of Zulaport Cutthroat in the deck, which is like a mini Marionette Master that we can play a little bit earlier, and also, just like Underhanded Designs as well, drains for us, which can be very important, just instrumental in helping us get to the mid-game so that we can get to Marionette Master and start controlling the board, taking control of the game, getting big Traffickers and Tireless Trackers, dealing a bunch of damage with Master and Cutthroat, But those drains can help us get to that point in the game where we're really rocking and rolling. They can be very, very helpful. So I want to play all the Zulaport Cutthroats I can, and Underhanded Designs is a card that has been very impressive in a few different situations. First off, it's pretty good against Emrakul. If they cast Emrakul, sure, they'll still be able to take over our next turn, but we can, at essentially instant speed, kill the Emrakul on their turn before they take our turn over. So it circumvents protection from instants on Emrakul, and that is always good. Some people play Sinister Concoction in the sideboard of black decks just to be able to pull that off. We can pull it off in the main deck while still having a card that drains the opponent whenever servo tokens or other artifacts come into play. So Underhanded Designs, again, very flexible and works for a few different reasons. It's nice to have removal on a stick that also functions as a possible win condition. And again, is good against decks other than just decks that play Emrakul. It's decent against turtly control decks because we can win the long game. It's also decent against aggro because it creates drain triggers to keep us in the game, gain us some life, and once we absolutely have to, we can press the panic button and kill one of their creatures as long as we have 2 artifacts. So it's great. I want to see all of the copies I can of it because it's good in multiples for a couple of reasons. Last thing I'll say here is that it's good in multiples because, yeah, you get multiple triggers when an artifact enters the battlefield. You can pay 2 mana, in that case, if you have 2 out, and drain twice. That's good, obviously, but you also want it in multiples because when you draw your second one, it makes you a lot more secure in sacrificing the first one to blow a creature up. So, lots of good reasons to play all 4. I'm going to do it. But on to the gruesome 2, some 4 copies of Syndicate Trafficker and 4 copies of Tireless Tracker in the deck. Everybody's been talking about this combo for a couple of weeks, and it does work really well. Notice that they curve into one another, which is really, really good. A 2-drop and then a 3-drop that work together so well. I don't think it's actually much of a coincidence. I think Wizards wants us to know how well these cards work together. And one thing I do want to point out, very important, mark this as important in your file here, is that if we sacrifice a clue to Syndicate Trafficker to make him indestructible, Tireless Tracker will also still get the +1/+1 counter. Doesn't matter how we sacrifice the clue, just that we sacrifice a clue. And both of these have the potential to get really, really big over the long game, especially Trafficker, because it's much easier to keep him around. They can just like ruin his path, your Tireless Trafficker, but they don't have that option against Trafficker. And yes, there is Grasp of Darkness, which circumvents indestructibility. Declaration in Stone, you know, that gets around into indestructibility too. But for the most part, against a lot of the removal in the format, especially again, Ruinous Path is a very good example. Also, Unlicensed Disintegration, which is in the Black-Red aggro deck that a lot of people are playing right now as a 4-of, circumvents that card as well. Very good in combat situations, obviously, to be able to get indestructible. So Syndicate Trafficker gets really big over the long game and can sometimes win us a game. Not to mention, best thing about him is that he's basically our Nantuko Husk in this sort of Aristocrats build. I'm going to play a 4-of Scrapheap Scrounger in the deck because it's freaking crazy in a lot of decks. Like, I was going to say it's crazy in this deck, but it showed up again, the Black-Red aggro deck over the last week and a half or so. It's in some of the Delirium builds that I've been seeing, so pretty popular card at the beginning of the format here, and I can see why, especially in this deck, because it has a special piece of synergy with Syndicate Trafficker, you know. As long as you have creatures in the graveyard to exile and mana to spend, you can loop this over and over with Syndicate Trafficker, getting him, you know, a lot of +1/+1 counters. And as long as you have a Marionette Master or Zulaport Cutthroat out, you're also getting drain triggers off of that interaction, which means, like, if you have a 4-power Marionette Master out, then just a couple of loops with Scrapheap Scrounger and Syndicate Trafficker can win you the game. Add to that the fact that it's just a 2-mana, 3-power thing that can beat them in the face sometimes if that's what you want it to do. And it's super resilient, you know, they can use all the removal they want on it. It'll keep coming back. So lots of reasons to play it. And it's got crazy synergy with Trafficker and our Drain cards. So yes. I'm going to slip in a 2-of Weaponcraft Enthusiast here in the deck, which started off as a 4-of, but I felt like we didn't need it as much as that. But I still want to play it in the deck. It's still a way of putting 3 things on the battlefield all at one time. That's good against aggro, and it provides at least 2 things that we can sacrifice to Syndicate Trafficker, get us drains, and, you know, triggers off of Marionette Master as well. So I just think there's no reason not to play some amount of these. I just don't think that we should go all the way on them, but I do think they have a place. Now, I've already mentioned this. We're going to play some ramp so we can more easily, quickly, and consistently get to Marionette Master. But we've got a cool wrinkle of synergy with these ramp cards here. We're going to play 3 copies of Hedron Crawler and 2 copies of Hedron Archive. Now, not only are these ramp, they're obviously also artifacts, so they feed into our artifact sub-theme here. And once they've done their job and ramped you into the cards you want them to, you can then safely sacrifice them. And the coolest thing about it is that with Hedron Archive, you don't even have to have a Syndicate Trafficker. It can just sacrifice itself. You can deal 4 damage to them with Marionette Master, and you can draw 2 cards. Like, yes to all of that. So we get to play more artifacts, and we get to ramp into Master. Yes. I'm going to finish off with the vehicles that we're playing in the deck, but I will give you here a budget option for one of them, starting with Smugglers Copter. That's the one I'm going to give you the budget option for. Smugglers Copter, we're going to play a whole playset because everything that everyone is saying about it is true. Hopefully, you followed my advice like 2 weeks ago when I put up white-red vehicles before anybody else, before we even had tournament results, and the deck is fairly similar to the tournament results. But anyway, I'm not going to toot my own horn too much. Hopefully, you bought this when I did that video, and this card was $4.50 because it's since undergone a more than 400% price spike and sits at about $17 now. It's most of the budget in the deck. Before this card spiked in price, the deck was under $100, but the deck is now $150 just because of Smugglers Copter. It seriously increased the total price of the deck by 50%. Very expensive card, but very, very good. And in this deck, it's even better than it is in a lot of decks because it's an artifact. Yet another piece of artifact synergy. We gotta play artifacts. Why not play arguably the best one in the entire format? But if you don't want to spend all of that cash, and I wouldn't blame you, you can just try Animation Module in this deck instead. Yet again, an artifact helps with the artifact synergy, but is also very, very good with a bunch of our cards, you know. We've put in +1/+1 counters on our Fabricate creatures, on Tireless Tracker, and on Syndicate Trafficker. So this could be really good. And with Syndicate Trafficker, it essentially reads pay 2 mana, +1/+1 counter, and indestructible. Because if you sacrifice an artifact in this case, you'll get an artifact right back with the module. So that seems like it could be really good. It's really cheap to cast and really cheap to buy. So, you know, a playset of Animation Module is like $2 right now. So you can probably afford that way before you can afford a playset of Smugglers Copter. So try that if you can't afford the Copter, let me know how it works out for you, because I think this could actually be a pretty good card in the deck. To finish off the main, I'm just going to play one copy of Skysovereign, because I have no idea why we wouldn't. Honestly, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't play a Silver Bullet copy of this, at least, if not two. But we're drawing a bunch of cards. You know, we won't need this until the mid or late game, and it's not entirely integral to our plan or anything. I just want to have the option sitting in the deck somewhere. It removes creatures. It's an artifact again. We have special synergy with artifacts in the deck. Triggers Underhanded Designs. We can sack it in a pinch, you know. So just yes to Skysovereign. I don't see any actual logic in not playing it. As far as crewing it goes, we're playing 25 creatures in the deck, and a few different copies of those creatures make more creatures, so we shouldn't have any problem crewing it. I just think it's a really good card right now that nearly any deck can play. Why wouldn't we? 24 lands in the deck, and it's a fairly easy mana base, obviously. You know, you're just going to play all the duels. Hissing Quagmire, as usual, overperforms. It maybe the best man land. Card is freaking ridiculous. And I do want to play the Evolving Wild so we can make sure that we get our green mana when we need it. Tireless Tracker is the only green card in the main deck. There are more green cards in the sideboard. You know, as far as the 75 cards go, we've got a fair amount of green cards. But in the main deck, we're only playing Tireless Tracker. The thing is, he's so freaking important that I want to have a land in there to fetch up our forests, you know. But I don't want to be relegated to playing more forests, at that matter. Sort of a delicate balance, and I think that is solved by Evolving Wilds. Here's your sideboard right here. Grasp of Darkness could probably be in the main deck. We're seeing a lot of aggro in the format towards the beginning, but I told you that would happen, you know. It always starts, aggro is very important at the beginning, and then we start putting together good removal plans in the format. We start figuring out what cards are good against the important aggro cards, and then mid-range control start taking over. So I'm not saying aggro is going to be important forever, but I do think it's important enough to carry that 4-of Grasp in the sideboard. Root Out is also a 4-of, if you didn't notice, because I think vehicles like Smugglers Copter, Skysovereign, and even the other stupid thing, Fleet Wheel Cruiser, are going to be very important in the format moving forward here. And there's going to be a lot of artifacts people play aside from those. So Root Out is super good because it destroys literally anything, Skysovereign included, which Natural State wouldn't be able to do if we were playing it. But it also creates a clue for us, so it triggers Underhanded Designs. When we sacrifice the clue, it triggers, you know, Tireless Tracker, it triggers Marionette Master. So Root Out could almost be in the main if we could find the slots for it. But the one I want to talk about is Cultivator of Blades. You know, this card, I don't know that I want to play it in the main. I mostly want to play it in games that are going to go long and have these big board states and stuff, which we usually can break stalemates by draining. But I also want to have the ability somewhere in the 75 cards to pump up all of these servo tokens that we're putting onto the battlefield. You know, Master or Marionette Master can put servos out, Weaponcraft Enthusiast puts servos out, and we're playing 25 creatures in all, plus vehicles. So I'd like to have a way to buff up that big board, and Cultivator's a good way of doing it. And the more I play it, the more it's like a poor man's Nissa Voice of Zendikar, you know? Not only can it make tokens, similar to her, but can also buff those tokens in much the same way she does. But I don't know that it actually deserves a main deck slot. But I really do think the comparison between Cultivator and Nissa is warranted in sort of a, you know, this is a decent budget replacement for a Nissa. But, same token, I don't think I'd play Nissa over it. I like that it has Fabricate, creates artifacts, all of that. So in this one instance, I think I'd rather play it than Nissa, just in this one deck. And here are your power rankings. The final score in Nintendo 64 in mid-60s is actually pretty good for a deck that's going to cost you about $150. It was just $100 or so until the ridiculous price spike on Copter. But again, if you don't want to play Copter and you play the animation modules, you're looking at less than $100 to play a very, very synergistic deck. Nearly every card feeds into one another in some way or another. You know, our resiliency is fairly high. Once we get to the mid or late game, you know, we start dealing a bunch of damage off of Marionette Master and a bunch of drains off of Zulaport Cutthroat, and that helps out our resiliency. By the way, we're gaining a fair amount of life off of Underhanded Designs and Zulaport Cutthroat, keeping us in the game. That helps our resiliency too. So lots of, you know, decent categories. Mostly synergy, resiliency are the ones that we're best in, but everything else is middling. That's because we don't really care. We just want to be synergistic. I want to drain and kill as quickly as possible with incremental damage in this deck. And not only that, we have multiple paths to victory aside from just the incremental damage. You know, we can make Syndicate Trafficker really big and swing in. Same ditto with Tireless Tracker. He can get huge and swing in too. We've got 25 creatures and 5 vehicles, a total of 30 creatures basically. And we get big boards because some of our creatures create other creatures so we can just smash in for damage sometimes. Now what I said earlier holds true here, and I've said it a bunch of times. Usually at the beginning of formats, fastest deck wins. Aggro is usually quite good at the beginning of formats because we, again, haven't put together the proper plans. What removal suite do we need to be using? What are the proper copies of each card in a control deck? Whereas aggro can just play all of the smallest, fastest creatures and smash in for the win. So until control and mid-range have figured out the proper plan for dealing with the best aggro decks in the format, aggro is usually dominant for the first 3 weeks or a month. Now, in a couple of months, after control and mid-range are a little bit more positioned, the metagame is shifted to become slightly slower, then I think this deck could really have a real place in the format, because if we can get to the good turns for us, we can really start winning the game rapidly. But that is all I've got to talk about for this deck for right now. What are we doing next time? I want to go ahead and tell you that. Like I said in the last video, my next one's going to be a double deck tech. I haven't done one of those in a fair long time now, but I'm going to do it next time. It's going to be blue-white Blink. On the one hand, we've got a peasant deck that only plays commons and uncommons, going to cost you $10. Blinks creatures for ETB value, basically. Very, very cheap and fairly effective too. And I'm going to build also a competitive Eldrazi Displacer deck that plays some of the best cards in the entire freaking format and gets crazy value off of flickering creatures. So, stay tuned for that. So I'm doing next time. I've almost got it ready to roll, and it should be up in just a few days. Until then, let me know how you felt about this one. What would you change? What did I leave out that you would have put in? All those questions as usual, because I'm always super interested. And, you know, just let me know if you liked it too. That also means something to me. It makes me feel good. In other words, like this content if you liked this content. Don't hit thumbs up if you didn't like it. But do hit thumbs up, because it helps me so freaking much. And I'm trying to get to 50,000 subscribers. And we've got a long way to go, but I know we can do it. I know we can do that. So help me out and subscribe if you're new, if you just haven't done it yet. And I will see you guys later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.